Good afternoon. My name is Cheryl Oldham, and I'm the Senior Vice President at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. I have the privilege of overseeing our work in the education and workforce space. So really want to just say thank you and appreciate all of you for hanging in with us today for these really important conversations about the current challenges and opportunities that we have as it relates to workforce. I think one of the really important things that we cannot overlook, though, is how critical to these workforce conversations is this issue of how we're doing on behalf of our students that are in our K through 12 and in elementary school today. They are our future workforce. And just a couple months ago, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or the nation's report card, as it's known, released some really staggering results showing the largest drop ever in 4th and 8th grade math. And so here this afternoon to talk about what this means for the kiddos in school today and our future workforce, I'm really so pleased to have the Secretary of Education, Aimee Guidera, and Emily Oster, who is a professor of economics at Brown University. In addition to several books, she's also the author of Parent Data, which, as she says, is a newsletter on data, pregnancy, child rearing, and anything on the minds of parents, which I think is a perfect setup for this conversation today, because I think that is an issue. One of the things that is on the minds of a lot of parents right now after the last couple years is how are my kids doing? So I want to welcome both of them here and say thank you for joining. And let's just start with Emily. Can you set the stage for us a little bit? Tell us a bit about the nation's report card and what we learned with the release of this data.
Absolutely. So the nation's report card is our most comprehensive nationwide measure of student achievement. It's a test that's typically given every 2 years to a set of 4th and 8th graders. And what's really helpful about this test is that they give the same test to kids in many different states. And so you can have some comparisons across states, and the sense that the same test over time, you can compare over time. And so what we saw in this most recent NAEP release in the spring of 2022 is that there were really large declines relative to 2019. I think you noted it was sort of historic declines, kind of 2 decades of progress lost. I think it's also important to note that that result is not unique. We have a lot of other testing of kids. Much of it happens at the state level. Those tests are not as comparable across space. They are comparable over time. They're very comprehensive in terms of covering all the students in a state. And there, again, we have seen very big declines between 2019 and 2021, maybe some recovery, but certainly not full recovery till the 2022 school year. And so these issues that we're facing, they are really deep. And I think it's also very important to remember, and I'm sure that the Secretary can get into this as well, that when we talk about student test scores going down, we're talking about students who are not able to read, or not able to read at grade level, or not able to do math at grade level. Like, these aren't just test score numbers, they are people. And that's, I think, what really of a lot of concern to parents.
I do want to turn to the Secretary, but I wanted to just a follow-on quick question. What did we see? I mean, what's sort of the bottom line? You said, we're not reading on grade level. I think I mentioned the historic declines in math. What about for sort of subgroups of kids? Worse for some than others? What is it looking like?
Yeah, sorry. That's, of course, among the most important points here, which is that all of these declines have been larger for more vulnerable students. And that is both demographically. So we've seen larger declines for students of color, larger declines for students who are lower income. It is also the case that we see larger declines simply at the bottom of the distribution. So if you ask about how children are doing in terms of their test scores, the kids who were at the 90th percentile, that 90th percentile has pretty much stayed where it was, but the 10th percentile has dropped off a lot. And so we're seeing, again, in all of the ways you can measure it, the more vulnerable are the students, the larger are the losses in academic learning.
really tragic and heartbreaking. Secretary Guidera, excuse me, do you want to chime in here for a second and tell us what does the data like for your state? I wish we could have a conversation with every secretary in every state and really dig in across the nation, but I would love to hear from Virginia's perspective.
Great. Happy to be here. It's Cheryl and Emily to be with you today and with the whole audience. In Virginia, this is not the sort of thing, usually we're really proud to talk about being on the top of things, and we are noteworthy in NAEP this year, but for the wrong reasons. Virginia had the largest declines in the nation on fourth grade reading and math. In fact, our declines were historic. They are 3 times worse than the national average, and steeper. And that is just a statement that is heart-wrenching, because as Emily said, is every single one of these data points represents a child. And it is representative of the fact that our one-size-fits-all education system is not seeing every child, and it is not meeting every child where he or she is and not getting them where they need to go. And that's what is on our mind all the time here in Virginia right now, is that this is about making sure that we see every child, and why it's so important to have this data, and especially longitudinal data at the state level, to be able to tailor the learning recovery that is critical. And just to give you a couple cents about how heart-wrenching this data is, for the first time in 30 years, Virginia, who has always been a high flyer on NAEP, for the first time ever, our students in fourth grade are either at or below average for the first time ever in 30 years. And bottom line is, we have erased 20 years of significant progress in terms of improving proficiency in math and reading in the last 4 years. And to Emily's point, this wasn't a surprise. We've been doing a whole lot of looking at data in the Youngkin administration since we arrived in January, and we had all the canaries in the coal mine before the NAEP data as well, so this is not a surprise. All the data, and again, I'm a big fan of the more data points you can collect, the richer picture you get. But for example, we also haven't been as transparent as the last speaker said, and building a sense of trust and understanding about the current realities. And I'll give you one example. We have a really incredible data collection system around early childhood, and especially around early literacy. And this data has never been shared publicly before this past year. And that data told us this year that 42% of our second graders are not on track to read independently by third grade. And we know that third grade reading on grade level is like one of the most important milestones for making sure that children are on track for success for life. And so the fact that we had that data, it is no surprise that our reading scores and math were as horrific as they were, and the decline was as bad, because all of our data points are redoing it. And I just want to close by saying one thing, is that, and I can't speak to other states, but in Virginia, this isn't just a story about the pandemic and closures. Although I will say, in Virginia, we do believe that the reason why we've had such horrific learning loss is because we were one of the worst states of keeping schools closed and keeping kids out of school. And we know that there's a correlation between that. So that's one piece. But actually, we started seeing our declines in statistically significant ways starting in 2017. And we have lots of data analysis. I'm happy to share it, and you can get out to your audience. But part of this is because we simply lost our way and lost our focus on the North Star, which is of high expectations for every child. And how do we make sure that we are setting those high expectations, that we are holding our system accountable, and that we're using data as a tool for improvement? And that's what in the Youngkin administration we're doing right now, is resetting that and saying we need to have high expectations. But just having high expectations doesn't change anything. Just having better data doesn't change anything. Those are critical parts to it. But it's what we do differently to get different results is what we're also focused on, and we can talk about that. But bottom line is, this is a clarion call, and this is a moment for all Virginians. And I think all people across the country, parents, students, teachers, the business community, just citizens, to realize that this is a moment where we are on the cusp of losing a generation of children, and that we must come together and figure out what we're going to do differently so we don't continue to get the same results.
Well, I'm struck by, the fact that it seems in conversations we've had about this, Aimee, is that, you're really embracing this data, right? And I feel like we certainly want people to. I mean, it's tragic, but the point is, and you said this, the data in and of itself does not change anything, but understanding how your kiddos are doing at these critical junctures tells, it forecasts what will happen in the future. And I was sort of struck when the results came out, where, you had people who were just saying, Well, it was COVID, of course. We knew it was going to be bad, nothing to see here, sort of move along. So, Emily, I wanted to ask, building on this idea that, like, it is the data doesn't change anything. But now that we have it, you're a big believer in data. How do we take this and do something with it? As opposed to blaming it or ignoring, what steps can we begin to take?
Yeah, so I think the phrasing that Aimee used, which is the data as a tool, I think is really the key here. So I think sometimes lately people have been using data as a tool like a cudgel. Data is a thing that we use to make our point and say that we were right, or try to ignore because we don't want to hear it. I think we should think here of data as a tool for recovery in this particular case. And we think about, we need to have recovery because of the pandemic. We also need a form of recovery that started long before this. So it isn't the case that, students were achieving at the levels that we wanted pre-pandemic. I mean, that's true in Virginia, but it's true across the country. This isn't a new problem. We have paid attention to it, but it is not a new problem. And data is something that we need to use to get out of that problem. It is going to be useful to answer questions like, what kinds of recovery interventions work? We have some sense of the kinds of interventions that work. Things like high dose tutoring. We have some sense of, the value of science of reading approaches. There are a few things, but we actually don't have enough precise information about that. Over the next several years, states and districts are going to spend the money that they have for recovery in different ways. Collecting data as they do that is going to be crucial for figuring out what are the interventions that work well, what are the interventions that work less well. Already, even at the end of the 2022 school year, we've seen wide variation in recovery, even across states. So there are states in reading scores who are back to where they were in 2019, and states whose reading scores went down between 2021 and 2022, even after having gone down between 2019 and 2021. So obviously, different things are happening in those different states. I don't know what those things are, but data is the way we're going to learn what those things are, and then be able to port the lessons from one place over into another place. And so getting focused on the idea of data as a tool for recovery, not data as a way to blame, but data as a tool for moving forward, that is where our kind of eyes and ears and everything need to be now.
I love how you positioned that, which is, there's certainly, I'm sure we could spend hours looking backwards and talking about all the ways in which we all had a role to play and where we are today, going back decades. But you're really taking this data, Aimee, and trying to say, okay, we're not afraid of it. We're going to own it, and we're going to move forward, and we're going to use it to make some changes. So do you want to share a little bit about what you all are planning in Virginia? And as the parent of a public school child in Virginia, I can't wait for everything that you're going to do.
Good. So, and this is a priority for Governor Youngkin. So when the NAEP results came out, the governor was who announced it. We had a session, and he announced it at 8:00 in the morning because he said this is going to be a priority of our administration, to use data as a flashlight, not as a hammer. And how do we continue to use data as this flashlight to focus and prioritize resources of time, energy, and money on what we know works, and to be laser focused on ensuring that we see every child and that we get every child where he or she needs to go. So let me run through 7 things that we announced that day and that we're working on now. One is we're going to raise our proficiency. Part of the reason that, as I said earlier, that I think that we're in the position we are is that we have been practicing the soft bigotry of low expectations. We have basically been saying it's okay not to be best in class. And this governor is all about being best in class. So number one thing we're doing is that the State Board of Education is focusing on raising our definition of proficiency to be more aligned with best in class according to NAEP, and benchmarking against those states about who are best in class of having higher definitions of what it means to be on track for success. So that's number one, is having a North Star that is benchmarked to college and career readiness, and making sure that everyone, our parents, our teachers, our students, understand how important it is to have a clear sense of why high expectations matter. Second of all, just in an emergency point, we are providing $30 million of learning recovery grants to families, that we feel like families cannot wait to access the services that they know that their kids need now that this data is telling them we have a crisis. And so while we're doing policy changes, we're also making it possible for families to tap into $3,000 learning grants that they can use to go get private tutoring, to hire a teacher to help do tutoring, to create a pod in their neighborhood and have a teacher do that, to go to a neighborhood tutoring center. But whatever it takes, we want to engage families and have them have a role in this as well. Third of all, again, getting people involved. We're launching a series of tutoring partnerships, and I could talk about lots of them, but the one I'll highlight is really an exciting one of having a partnership between our historically Black colleges and universities and the Urban League, and our school divisions that really had the biggest learning losses. And so we know coming out of COVID that so many of our kids feel alone, they feel isolated, that they didn't have the relationships. So we're truly trying to build mentorships and tutoring relationships in communities where people can also have relationships with people to say, I can be like this person, and doing this on college campuses. So really an aspirational and human touch of doing learning recovery as well. And what I love about this is an all hands on deck of how do we get universities, how do we get business, how do we get individual families to tutor. And so that way we've also done a call to action for people to sign up for the Khan Academy training to become tutors and to be able to do tutoring online with students who are signing up for help. And I'll go more quickly on this. Fourth of all, we're going to hold schools accountable for results and hold all adults accountable for results. So we're going to redo our accreditation and our accountability system. So again, that we have greater transparency about how well every single school in Virginia is serving all students. And right now our accreditation system is not working. To just give you a data point, with those results that you just saw, and with 42% of our second graders not ready to read online, there is not a single school in Virginia that is not fully accredited. So I'll just pause there for a second, and that is the message we're giving to the people of Virginia: is everything is okay, nothing to look at behind the curtain. But in reality, we have crises going on, and so part of this is getting people information. Again, not to shame and blame, but getting people information so that we can act on it. Fifth of all, that we are trying to really focus on creating the world's greatest talent pool to teach, because we know how important teachers are. It is the most important determinant of student success outside what happens at home. And so we are working, and I don't have time to go into it, but to attract, grow, and retain the world's greatest teaching force, because we know our students deserve it, and we know that this is the way to have sustainable learning happen. Sixth of all, we are going to make sure we are providing teachers, students themselves, and parents actionable information in the same format at the same time, so everybody has an idea, by taking all the data that's been collected on kids and actually focusing on getting it into people's hands in an actionable way. We're then going to build personalized learning plans for students who are further behind, and then we're going to provide tutoring and training for our teachers about how do you communicate and about with data with students and with parents, so that it is a partnership to bring students around, and we're going to use data to really drive that. And finally, we're going to ask our school divisions to be really transparent about how they're using, in Virginia, the $2 billion that remains on the books for school divisions from federal recovery funds, and ensuring that those plans will be published by January 1, to have plans about how our local school districts using the recovery funds to make sure that they are addressing this learning loss. So that's our action plan, but you'll see it involves using data differently, it involves partnership, it involves investing in people, and it involves having high expectations.
I mean, I think you've laid out a great action plan, Aimee, that every state could follow. I think, unfortunately, I don't think we have a lot of policymakers probably in our audience today. We have regular people. We've got employers, we've got chambers, we've got philanthropy, we've got nonprofit, we've got lots of folks, but people who don't have the levers that maybe you do to make policy change. Do either of you have thoughts or suggestions to the folks in this audience about what they can do? I mean, they could see this heartbreaking data, but what action can they take? We certainly have access to the network of the business community and the chambers, and we plan to do everything that we can at the Chamber and Chamber Foundation to make sure they have this information and can use it. But I'd be curious, Emily, do you hear from parents? Is this like a sort of burning question from folks? Is how are my kids doing post-COVID?
Yeah, I do. And I think that, telling parents kind of where to look for this information is sort of key. I think we talk a lot in the public policy space about these NAEP scores. Actually, from the standpoint of an individual parent, your state test scores, which is available at your school level or your district level, are a lot more informative than the NAEP scores, which are not given to every kid, not given to every district. And I think beyond that, there's this sort of always very complicated, but the more ownership as a parent you can take of kind of what is happening at your kid's school, at least understanding what do the test scores look like, what kinds of investments are they making. I think that's what parents are looking for in terms of, trying to understand what's happening with it all day.
Thank you for that. Aimee, do you have anything to add in terms of audience? I know you
real
have a
fast,
particular interest in how the business community responds here.
I am a huge fan of the business community. The business community, please get involved, be engaged. We need critical partners and critical friends. And this is your future workforce. This is the future of talent, right? This is talent forward, is that we will not have the workforce that this country needs, and we will not be investing in people the way we need to if the business community is not involved as partners. That's involving tutoring, that's involving in being partnerships. It's about opening up your businesses to have interns and to get both teachers and students in there. But also to have your employers in the schools. We need to break down the walls between schools and work and ensure that we provide as much exposure, as much experience, and as much expertise as possible to our students, that they understand why what they're doing in school matters for their future well-being, and that also that work is exciting and school is connected to work. And my last thing is with parents. I cannot say enough about what Emily's talking about with parents. We have got to prioritize, as we are in Virginia, that parents have to be partners in everything. And it starts with making sure that parents have the information that they can trust and use and know how to use it to support their children. And so this all goes back to NAEP and tests and data, is that there's not a single organization or entity in the history of the world that has gotten great results without changing how they use data and using data as a tool for improvement. And that's what we need to do in education. And we need to learn from the business community about how to do that better. Thank you for your leadership, Cheryl, for helping to bring us all together. So thank you.
No, I appreciate both of you so much for being here with me today. And I know we could talk for hours long, but we've gone over. So I will just say thank you. And I hope we can continue this conversation in another setting.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks.